Welcome to Parker's MMA Show. If you want to learn about all things going down in the fight world, you've come to the right place. Each episode, your host Parker Keane will take a deeper dive into the always entertaining world of sanctioned fist fighting. Now here's your host, Parker Keane.
Round 3. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We're good. I'm good. All right. Let's get into it. We're live. Episode 37. This episode, we're going to recap the 2 fight night cards that went down last week. We're going to dive into Jon Jones versus Francis super fight. And then we're going to jump into some current events and kind of what turned out to be a little bit of a crazy week in MMA. And then we've got a fight card this weekend we're going to look into. So we got a lot to go over. We're going to try to keep it to an hour. Like always, housekeeping. Everyone like, subscribe, share, do what you got to do. Keep getting the word out there, and we'll keep coming back for more. So, Billy, we're back. What's going on?
Man, it's so funny. Like, I feel like we got just the all-you-can-eat buffet of great matchups over the past week or so. And I can't find one fight outside the main event now that my boy Kevin Holland is off the card. Yeah. I can't find one fight that's interesting this weekend outside of the main event.
Yeah, we got the main event, and then we got our boy Brock Weaver is fighting on there. He's always fun, but I agree. I mean, I looked over the card, and I think I texted you, and you agreed. We're like, what other fight besides the main event do you care about? So we'll save that for the end. But let's jump right in. I want to talk about the 2 fight night cards that we had following the Justin Gaethje Tony Ferguson card. Let's start with the Wednesday event. That was Gilbert Teixeira and Anthony Smith, Lionheart Smith. I thought, obviously there was a lot of controversy coming out of that fight about the stoppage. In my eyes, Anthony Smith started great. Round 1, round 2, he looked really, really good. I think he started a little too fast, obviously, and I'll ask you about that here in a little bit. But after that, I mean, he just got battered. I think he took a big left hook in the 2nd or 3rd round, and then it got followed up with a big elbow. That was the elbow that knocked out his teeth that we heard him talking about between rounds. So what was your thought on that fight? I think Glover, both of us kind of... Did you pick Glover, or did we both go with Anthony Smith?
Okay, I picked Glover because that's my boy, because Glover trains in Danbury, Connecticut.
Okay, that's right. That's right. Yeah, so you were right, and I was completely wrong. I thought Anthony Smith was going to go in there and blow the doors off of Glover, and he looked really good in the first 2 rounds, and then after he got cracked, which I think the left hook was the one that broke his orbital, and I heard him in his interview saying basically after that he was just, the whole fight was a fog, and he couldn't pick up any of the punches coming in. And I thought he did as much as he could do to survive and stay in the fight, but he just got battered. So let's jump into that. Thoughts on the stoppage? There was a lot of blame thrown at the corner, thrown at Jason Herzog, the ref, thrown at the doctor. Where do you stand on the stoppage?
I think it's an impossible situation, to be honest. I think, you hear people like Ariel and other big names in the MMA media who come out and they're all over this, how bad this stoppage was, how hard this was to watch. But the flip side argument to me is I thought Anthony Smith was doing just enough to kind of keep himself in that fight over and over again.
Yeah, the whole time.
And Glover keeps going for submissions the entire time when Smith is clearly hurt. And if he just keeps throwing punches there's a few times where I felt like he threw a couple more unanswered punches instead of going for a rear naked choke, and there's no doubt that fight gets ended. But what kept happening was he kept getting him right to the edge, then he'd go for the rear naked choke, and Anthony Smith would defend himself. So what's Jason Herzog supposed to do? Is he supposed to step in and go against a fighter who's intelligently defending himself? He can't coach Glover in there and say, hey, hit him a few more times and I'll stop this thing.
Right.
So in that sense, it falls on the corner, but I mean, you're going to talk about this later, I'm sure, but Anthony Smith has really come out in defense of his corner and said, I don't let my guys throw in the towel. We have a conversation about it. I don't let them do it. So if that's the agreement and that's the way the fight played out, I mean, You can be mad all you want, but I don't really think the ref is supposed to get in there and stop someone who's intelligently defending submissions and clearly not out.
Yeah, that was a hard one. That was kind of Anthony Smith's point. He just flat out said on Ariel's show, he's like, I take that option off the table. That's not an option. If you're going to corner me, that's not an option, period. So with that in mind, I agree with you. I think he was doing just enough to stay in that fight. I don't think Jason Herzog did anything wrong. And he actually came out on, I think, social, maybe Instagram or Twitter, and basically kind of took the blame for the beating. But the bottom line is, I think he did the best job reffing that fight that he could. The only person I will say maybe could have stepped in and stopped that fight was the doctor, just because it looked bad. I think, after he broke his orbital, it was kind of like that Tony Ferguson, situation. That last shot he took from Justin Gaethje, it was just like every shot he was taking, whether it was a jab, straight, whatever, he was bracing, kind of covering up, like clinching. You could tell it was really, really hurting him. So I don't place the blame on the corner or the ref. I think if it needed to be stopped earlier, the doctor could have maybe stopped it and just said, hey, with this broken orbital, he's not able to fight. But besides that, I mean, it was just a case of, I think Anthony Smith got started too fast. I think he was anticipating on getting Glover out of there in the first or second round. Then he gets clipped, and then his gas tank's gone. And Glover's just a veteran that basically just capitalized on that and was able to get a huge win. At 40 years old, is now on a 4-fight win streak in the light heavyweight division. I mean, honestly, one fight away from another title shot at 40 years old?
Yeah. So my thing about Anthony Smith's strategy in this fight, and I think we talked about it, last podcast, but the dynamic of no crowd means that you hear every word out of your coach's mouth, the other coach's mouth, the announcer's mouths. And I just think Anthony Smith got overcoached. And maybe it's a situation where if you're in an arena, you need to coach like that if you're Mark Montoya, because, he might not hear you. The crowd's loud, everyone's going ballistic. So you might get 1 out of every 5 or 6 instructions.
Yeah.
But when he's getting every single instruction and he's getting every single, call, every punch, every elbow called out to him in those first rounds, I mean, we could hear it on the broadcast. I mean, no wonder he gassed out. I mean, the volume he was throwing, the pace he was throwing was just not sustainable for not just Anthony Smith, but no one in that division. Then you have Glover Teixeira, who, I mean, his MO is he's going to throw big bombs with that left hand. And he's an unreal grappler. He's an unbelievable grappler. If you even get close, if you get to 60% of your gas tank against a grappler like that, he's going to suck the whole thing out of you because he could just wear you down on the ground. And that's exactly what Glover did as soon as he clipped Smith. He took him down, he got him to the ground, and he was able to wear him out over the course of the next, 10, 12 minutes and eventually win the fight.
Yeah, the commentators made a big, especially I think DC was the one that kept harping on that, it was like literally James Krause and Montoya were like playing an Xbox game with Anthony Smith. It was the weirdest thing. They would shout out a command, he would do it, it would be successful, they'd do it again. But I agree. I think that's one of the dynamics with the no crowd factor that, we're going to learn about is like, hey, you can hear everything your coach is saying. So maybe the corner needs to do a little better job of pacing the fight. Because, I mean, that could be, like you said, that could be the normal pace that they're used to calling. But when you have 18,000 people screaming, the fighter gets every, second or fifth call. So, yeah, it was, I don't know. It was weird. Like I said, he looked really, really good. He was doing everything perfect. I mean, I don't think it's as much of him gassing. But once he broke his orbital, I mean, it was just like, every punch he was getting hit with was laboring. And yeah, that was hard to watch, but I mean, what he said, he basically said that, hey, everyone needs to quit being sissies. This is cage fighting. And I mean, when you sit back and look at it, almost a week removed from the event, I kind of agree. I was like, I don't see anyone. I don't see his corner at fault. I don't see Jason Herzog at fault. It was just a beating. The guy got hurt in there and he got beat. And a big win for Glover. So that leads me to my next question. Where do these guys go from here? Obviously, Glover's 40. Anthony Smith is still, somewhat in his prime, and I think could, potentially make another run at the light heavyweight title, assuming Jon's going to go up and fight in heavyweight. I think that's a division that, he could be a serious title contender for the next 4 or 5 years. So where do these guys go from here?
So for me, if Jon's going up to heavyweight, which kind of all signs point that way, the way Jon's talking about it now, it seems really serious, and this is what he wants to do. I think you basically have a 4-man tournament for the vacant light heavyweight title. I think you have Thiago Santos, Tom Reyes, Jan Blachowicz, and Glover Teixeira. And you put all 4 of those guys in the bracket. You can match each of them up with whoever. I think a couple of those guys at least have fought before. So maybe you want some fresh matchups, at least in the first round. But those are my 4 guys that I'm looking at as, they all kind of have a claim, in my opinion, to be the next guy to fight for that vacant title. So I would match those 4 guys up.
Yeah, I had, I think Anthony Smith fighting Corey Anderson right now makes a lot of sense. Again, it's all dependent on Jon. If Jon wants to stay in the division, I would assume he gets Jan Blachowicz next. And then maybe you get Glover versus Dom Reyes. And then you get Anthony Smith versus Thiago Santos. That would be a really, really fun fight. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
They fought at middleweight.
Middleweight. Right. That was Anthony Smith's last loss before he went on that run. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great fight. I think that's a fun matchup. Obviously, Santos hasn't fought since Jon Jones, right?
No, because he destroyed his knee in that fight.
Both of them. Yeah, so I think in the next couple months, I think by the summer, June, July, you're going to know what Jon's doing. And I think the division's going to start moving along. So, yeah, that was a huge win for Glover. Still doing it at 40 years old is pretty fucking amazing. But outside of Glover's performance, for me, this was the fight on the card on Saturday was a lot better card, start to finish. But who was your biggest winner out of this card outside of the main event?
I have to go with Brian Kelleher. I mean, I thought, he looked really good against an undefeated prospect who was heavily favored against him. He's now, I think, won 3 in a row. I think 3 in a row in 4 of his last 5, something like that. He's putting a nice streak here together. I thought he did a really good job with the Sugar Sean call out. I think he's a unique, really well-spoken guy. I mean, I've heard him he did the MMA beat back when they still had that on MMA fighting before, done a lot of media stuff. I think Kelleher is a guy who, if he wins fights, he has the personality to be, much bigger than your average UFC fighter. Who'd you have as your biggest winner?
Yeah, for me, it was Drew Dober. That was a guy that I had an eye on just because I had, I've seen his last couple fights. The fight that really put him on the map for me was that, I'm going to struggle with this name, the Hasparas fight.
Nasrat Haqparast.
Nasrat Haqparast fight. That was one that we were super, and Drew Dober came out there and starched him in the first round. So that kind of caught my eye. And the dude's like a fucking specimen. He's shred city, and he trains with Justin Gaethje. He's one of Justin Gaethje's main training partners. So he put on a hell of a show. Alexander Hernandez is a guy that, 2 years ago this time, everyone was high on. He was this young, brash, up-and-coming guy that was the self-proclaimed, Conor McGregor 2.0. And he went in there and just absolutely lit him up. So Drew Dober, I think, put himself in a really, really good position. He's now 31 years old. He's got 33 MMA fights. He's won 6 of his last 7 fights. I think it's time for him to get a top 10 fight. I'd like him to see him match up against Diego Ferreira, who just came off a big win against Showtime Pettis, or Raging Al would be a really fun fight. I think both of those guys are right inside the top 10. So, yeah, Drew Dober, for me, he put on a damn good show, and I was very, very impressed with him. That's pretty much it for that card. So that was the Wednesday night. Saturday night, we had... Go ahead.
Your boy, Drew Dober, did you see the article about him as Drew Dober's apparently a phenomenal baker? his first job out of college, he worked as a baker in a grocery store, and that dude can like makes his own donuts, like can make like really like exquisite, like elaborate pastries. Like he will kick your ass and he'll bake you chocolate chip cookies afterwards.
Seems like a very, very nice guy too. His interview and everything is just super respectful.
Yeah, that guy seems awesome. I would love to have Drew Dober over for cookies. I would love to have him on the podcast. This guy I think is going to be he's going to be a hardcores fighter, but he's going to be one of those guys that like the MMA world kind of knows about, and we're all in on Drew Dober. I'm very high on him. It's a great pick for winner of this card.
Yeah, he's definitely making a lot of noise. So let's move on to the next card. We had Alistair Overeem, obviously a legend, taking on Walt Harris in the return. Walt Harris's return after the kidnapping and murder of his daughter is obviously tragic situation that took, kind of unfolded over the last year. I thought for Alistair, this is a hard fight, to not get emotional about it. The whole lead up was all about Walt Harris and what's going on with his family. And I thought Alistair handled it as professional as possible from start to finish, the whole build up, the fight getting canceled multiple times, to the way he handled himself, overcoming the early adversity. Alistair got clipped early, like in, maybe in the first minute and a half, and he was able to survive. He stalled on the ground with a heel hook. He was able to get back to his feet. He caught a sloppy kick from Walt Harris, put him to the ground, and basically controlled him for 3 minutes of the first round. So although he got dropped in that first round, I think he actually won the first round. And then the second round comes out, looks awesome, drops Walt Harris with a big high kick, and then follows it up with a straight right, and then basically just mounts him and beats him down and finishes the fight. So Alistair, another guy, I think he's, 40 now also? Just turned 40?
40 years old, 65 MMA fights professionally.
It's incredible. And to come in and, he's basically a guy that's going to main event cards the rest of his career. He had a huge payday. He made $400,000 at 40 years old, fighting in heavyweight, which is awesome. He's got to be one of the top earners in heavyweight, and I don't see any reason he can't keep doing this for another 2 to 3 years. The shape he's in, phenomenal. He's just a guy that I think he's been able to just keep it going and keep evolving and keep growing and keep learning and just finding a way to stay relevant and stay competitive as the years go on. This dude's first fight was in 1999. You and me were in grade school back then. It's crazy.
Alistair Overeem has the best fight IQ of any heavyweight. And the way you know that is every single fight, every single one. And we're talking about a guy, 65 fights. That's 2 careers worth of fights. This guy had a whole fight career before he ever got to the UFC. Every single fight, he comes with a new skill. Every single fight, something is better. This is a guy who is a legitimate world champion K1 kickboxer who won a fight this weekend at 40 because of grappling. He won that fight because he took Walt Harris to the ground, and he was able to control him in that side saddle position and hit him with big shots on the ground. Then he comes out in the second round. He's able to easily mount him, no problem with the guard, no problem on the ground, and just, takes control and lands those big bombs. There's virtually no one, and really no one at heavyweight, not that I can think, that has made these improvements and these transitions over their career that Alistair has. And for me, I think what's interesting about Alistair is he's never really had like a home-based camp. He always kind of hops camp to camp, every few fights, every few years. And I heard an interview with him one time where he talked about how he looks to learn something new from each of these coaches and take that. And now he's with Team Elevation and Curtis Blades and working with him every day. So I think that's helping him a lot on the ground. But it never ceases to amaze me how much better Alistair Overeem gets fight to fight. The only thing that's going to derail him is if he goes up against some of these heavy hitters and gets knocked out.
Yeah, that was one thing. When he came and did a seminar at McSweeney MMA, that was one thing I asked him was like, hey, what are your plans for after fighting? And he said he wants to coach. Flat out, he wants to coach. He loves learning and studying and learning new things and evolving and working with people. And I mean, when he was talking to us, he was talking about all kinds of things from his, he does Wim Hof breathing, cold plunges, the things he's learned over the years with his diet. Just like you said, he's traveled the world for 25 years training with the best fighters in the world across multiple organizations, multiple disciplines, and the dude's just a wealth of knowledge. Like being in there and training with him is just like, holy shit, this guy has seen it all, he's done it all, he knows so much and has so much to give back. And I think someone with that high of fight IQ at heavyweight can go a long time, because a lot of these heavyweights, the Derek Lewis's of the world, they get by from just having one or two things that they're good at. They have that big bomb that's like Teddy Atlas calls it, it's the great eraser. Francis has it, Derek Lewis has it, DC's wrestling, obviously, but Alistair's a guy that's been able to just keep learning and combine all of his knowledge from, a lifetime of fighting and stay at the highest of high levels. So it's very, very impressive. That leads me to my next question. Do you think we'll see Alistair Overeem get another shot at the title?
For me, they can't after DC and Stipe eventually finish their trilogy, there's no way you can deny Francis Ngannou at this point, right? I mean, we all agree you have to give it to Francis. So that being said, I think if Overeem were to win one more against the top 5 guy, I think you could see them giving him a shot. But that won't be for at least another year, because we have to see the Stipe DC trilogy and we have to see the Francis fight. And if Overeem's still on a 1 or 2 fight winning streak, over that time, I think you could see him get a shot at the title. But I mean, once he gets there, for me, it's impossible. I don't see anyone beating Francis. I just don't see it. So,
it's dependent on two things, really. DC, Stipe. What happens after that? Do both guys walk away? If both guys say, hey, we had a great trilogy, we've had great careers, we're going to hang it up and we're done, I think heavyweight gets pretty crazy. And I could see Alistair making a run again, because to me, I think he came in, or he's ranked now at number 6. He has one more win against a top 5 guy. Who else is there? If DC and Stipe leave, Jon Jones doesn't come up, you've got basically Francis, and then you've got Curtis Blades, who's one of his teammates. So I don't know. I could see it, especially Alistair's a guy that heavyweight is kind of aging out. I mean, a lot of these guys are getting close to retiring, and he's a guy that he told us flat out, he said, I'm going to fight for 3 to 4 more years. My main goal is to win the heavyweight title. After that, I'm done. And I could see it. I could definitely see him getting another crack. But I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be for probably a year and a half, which at the shape he's in, it's not a huge deal to me.
Here's the big benefit for Alistair Overeem getting a title shot is Francis Ngannou has knocked out Curtis Blades twice now. They're not going to book a Francis Ngannou Curtis Blades trilogy. And if Alistair were to get one more win over one of those top 5 guys, there wouldn't really be anyone, like you said, left for Francis to fight. So they would book the Alistair rematch because it has the most name value.
Yeah, that's the biggest fight. If those two guys retire, Jon Jones doesn't come up, that's the biggest money fight, is Alistair versus Francis, for the rematch. All right, so where do you think both of these guys go from here? Let's start with Alistair, and then we'll go into Walt Harris.
For Alistair, I mean, I really want to see the Derek Lewis fight. I think a couple of fights ago, maybe it was against Olenek or I forget, but he called out Derek Lewis. I like that fight. I think it's kind of your barroom brawler against your very technical kickboxer. So I really like that. But I think there's tons of interesting matchups available. I would watch him fight Volkov. That's a previously scheduled fight. I would watch him fight Jairzinho Rozenstruik again because I think he got kind of shafted with that stoppage. I would watch him fight Curtis Blades again because, I think he kind of deserves to avenge that loss. But I think there's tons of options for Alistair.
Yeah, for me, I think Black Beast makes the most sense. That's a fun fight. You can headline, another fight night with that. I think Alistair's 6, the Black Beast is 8. I'd like to see that next. And then, I think the winner of that puts himself up there with another Francis fight. If Jon doesn't come up and we assume that DC and Stipe retire after this, which I think they would, because I don't think anyone's going to sign up to fight Francis again, and roll the dice on your legacy, whether it's either one of those guys. It's just a very, very tough spot to be put in. The winner of that fight, they're going to have their last send-off retirement fight against Francis Ngannou. And what if you get starched? What kind of legacy? What does that do to your legacy? Especially for a guy like DC that, to me, kind of gets overlooked. And we'll talk about this later on. But I mean, I think DC is a top 5 fighter of all time, and no one. That's not a common thought. DC is someone that just kind of gets overlooked because he's been number 2 to Jon Jones all these years. And if Stipe gets the better of him, he'll kind of be number 2 to Stipe. So, yeah, it's interesting. But what about for Walt Harris?
I want to see him fight Junior Dos Santos. It's 2 guys coming off a loss. I think it's kind of a question of, is Walt Harris a legitimate top 10 heavyweight, and is Junior Dos Santos have anything left in the tank? So I think that's a good fight. It's a fun fight. Again, I think you could put that on the main card of a pay-per-view. I think you could put that, maybe a co-main event of a fight night. But I think it's a good fight.
Yeah, all right, let's talk about the undercard. I thought the undercard was really, really fun. You had Angela Hill versus Claudia Gadeja. That was a great fight. Dan Ige versus Edson Barbosa. That was a fun fight. Song Yudong versus Marlon Vera. That was a fun fight. But all 3 of those seemed to be marred a little bit by controversy. I don't know how you saw it. I had Angela Hill winning a very close decision. I thought she was just more active. And I really like Angela Hill, so I was maybe a little biased. Dan Ige versus Edson Barbosa. I thought they got that one right. I thought Danny Ige was maybe just...
Oh, Parker.
What?
Parker.
You're going to disagree?
Oh, boy. Keep going.
Well, I thought he landed the more powerful shots and was more aggressive over the three rounds. Okay? Song Yudong versus Vera was very, very close. I thought Song Yudong faded the last 2 rounds. I thought his power was very strong in the first round, but I thought Marlon Vera did enough to get that victory. So tell me what you're thinking about Edson Barbosa.
Edson Barbosa nearly finishes Dan Ige in round 2 of this fight. He hits a clear, like a liver kick that drops Ige, and Ige recovers by using some defensive jiu-jitsu, but Edson Barbosa dominated the first 2 rounds of this fight. Dominated them. Every single shot that he threw hurt Ige, and Ige would have to throw 5 or 6 to just nick Edson. I didn't think that fight was close.
I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that. But watching it, I thought Dan Ige won initially. Are you agree with the other 2?
So I thought the Angela Hill fight was the worst of these 3 decisions. Maybe, I don't know. It's this and the Barbosa fight were really bad. But Angela Hill clearly wins the last 2 rounds of this fight for me. Very obviously, nearly a 10-8, I thought, in round 2.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And I thought that was shitty because that was her first real crack to get in the top 10, and I feel like she had that taken away from her. Claudia Gadeja just hasn't looked to me the same as I don't know.
She got I think she got lucky with a decision against Carlos Esparza too. So I think she's getting a couple benefit of the judges and not winning these fights.
Yeah.
The Yudong Vera fight I thought was actually legitimately close. I think he really could have given the second round to anyone.
I think those 2 guys are going to be a problem at bantamweight. Both of those guys are really fucking good.
That Song Yadong was my bantamweight to watch.
Yeah, I like Marlon Vera. I like the way he fights. I still want to see him versus Sugar Sean. I think that's a really fun fight. But yeah, those two guys, I don't think there was a real loser there. That was a great fight. Both of them are starting to bloom in their UFC career. So I think we're going to see both of those guys for the foreseeable future. All right. Anything else on the fight cards, the fight night cards?
I just feel bad for Edson Barbosa at this point because if you remember, he got screwed on a decision against Paul Felder, in my opinion, too. I mean, that was a close fight.
That's another one that I don't know. That was super, super close.
That's tough, though. He looked good. I thought he looked good at that weight. I think he could be a problem at 45.
No, I think he could, too. And, I mean, he didn't seem to struggle at all with the weight. He looked, just as good. Didn't look like he was diminished in any way from the weight cut. Yeah, I agree. I think he could have some new life and have a lot of fun fights down there. There's a lot of good matchups for him down at 145. So, all right. Let's move on. That was the fight night cards. Jon Jones versus Francis. We're a little late to the party, and I think everyone's kind of playing possum here. I still think this is the next fight for Jon Jones. I think there's a lot of shit going on behind the scenes right now, but let's just go through the timeline. You kind of lead us off and walk us through everything that went down last week.
Yeah, basically, Jon Jones on Twitter says he thinks it's time to solidify his legacy, essentially. And
which is crazy, as if he already hasn't solidified his legacy. Are you kidding me? Have you seen his resume?
Well, I think the thing that bothers Jon is that there's anyone who questions that he's the greatest of all time. Like, for every person who says GSP's the greatest, or Fedor, or Anderson Silva, or whoever, like, that bothers Jon. Jon wants it to be unquestionable. That when he retires, everyone asks who's the best MMA fighter of all time, and everyone says it's Jon Jones.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think he's ready for big money fights too. I think he'll make if they book the Francis fight, he'll make probably what he made in his last 3 fights. It's
the biggest. This is the biggest non-McGregor card or fight that the UFC can make. This is way bigger than DC Stipe 3. It's bigger than Masvidal against anyone other than Conor. It's bigger than Nate Diaz against anyone other than Conor. Who else would be a big draw? I mean, like,
Khabib versus Francis, any fight besides a fight with Conor McGregor. I think this is the number 2 biggest fight you can make right now. And like, it's a perfect time to make it right now.
The only thing that might top this would be some sort of freak show fight. There's no legitimate MMA fight. But like, okay, so like if Floyd Mayweather got in there for a mixed rules fight with Conor McGregor, it outsells this. If Brock Lesnar gets in the UFC, it probably outsells this.
Like, give me Brock and Francis. Let's get crazy.
Logan Paul, like some weird gimmicky thing could outsell this just because like that's the way this sport works. But there is no legitimate MMA fight without Conor McGregor that outsells Francis versus Jon Jones.
All right, so that leads me to my next question. If they do book this fight, which I think they will for the end of the summer, I think this is your International Fight Week pay-per-view headliner if Conor's not headlining it. But there's been a lot of talk. This should obviously be for a belt, correct?
This has to be for, at the very least, the interim heavyweight belt. And the thing that, if I'm Jon and Francis, the thing that you want to happen is you want DC and Stipe to take as long as possible to get booked. Because if that happens and they have to wait and wait and wait on that fight and that trilogy to get concluded and it holds up the division, Francis and Jon get way more bargaining power to argue we need an interim belt and this is the fight to make.
Yeah. I personally don't see any huge downside for Jon taking this fight. I think, yes, it's a risk. You're walking in there against the Mike Tyson of MMA. But Jon's got some of the best head movement in the game. He's the Floyd Mayweather of MMA. He rarely gets hit solid. Obviously, we've seen it doesn't take much from Francis, but do you see outside the chance of him getting knocked out, any major downside for Jon taking this fight right now?
There's no reputational risk, Jon, right? He won't be favored in this fight when he takes it. Like, he will be an underdog in this fight. And if he goes out there and loses it, even if he gets knocked out in 30 seconds, other than the physical toll of being in a cage fight with, Francis Ngannou, which is, has 2 Mack trucks strapped to his hands, like, other than that physical toll, there's no reputational damage. Like, no one's going to look less upon Jon. It will be a huge boost to Francis if he can beat Jon, but Jon is not going to be looked down upon his legacy if he can't beat a guy who right now looks like he's the greatest heavyweight of all time.
Yeah, I think if Francis, there's huge upside for Francis. If he beats Jon, I mean, he's an international superstar, I think. Because outside, Jon Jones is still, top 3 famous fighter in the world. And if Francis goes in there and knocks out Jon Jones, after the bodies that he's been stacking, that's going to be huge. And I don't know if that happens. If Francis goes in there and starches Jon, is that the end of Jon at heavyweight? Does he stay down at light heavyweight and just ride out his career? Or do you think we see some sort of trilogy set up?
No, I think if Jon gets knocked out, like, he could legitimately think about retirement. I think if he gets knocked out at heavyweight, he'll go back down to light heavyweight and finish out his career there. But I kind of think when Jon loses the light heavyweight belt, if that ever happens, I think he'll retire from MMA legitimately. He might look for one rematch, but if he ever gets to a point where he's no longer champion, he's not going to fight anymore.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What do you think the major holdup is in booking this fight? Because all the UFC brass seems to not be interested in this fight. Dana's kind of laughed it off, kind of dancing around it. What's holding this fight up from being booked? Because I think now is the perfect time. It's the perfect time right now.
It's expensive. It's an expensive fight. Francis wants a lot of money. Jon wants a lot of money. That's it. And the UFC doesn't want to pay it. And the UFC is, I think, kind of financially carrying Endeavor, the parent company right now, who is struggling with the lack of live events. So I think that's legitimately what's going on. I think the UFC is trying to do, high margin events and, get away with some less expensive fighters and drive viewership while people are still at home and can't go to the fights. And, I think Dana might be also holding out for when they can do this with a gate, because I don't think he feels a rush to book this fight.
Yeah, especially if DC versus Stipe is not getting booked anytime soon. I think you need to kind of line up those timelines so the winner, they roll into another fight after that. So, alrighty, what else? If they don't book this at heavyweight, who do you see Jon fighting next? And same question for Francis.
I think Jon will fight Jan Blachowicz. I think Jon would actually fight Jan Blachowicz relatively soon. It kind of reminds me of the Derek Lewis, Daniel Cormier situation, where I think Jon knows there's only one real way that Jan can beat him, and he is going to prepare for it and go out there and take care of business. I think Francis, you could see him get put on the shelf again. That is what I think is the most likely scenario. The only thing that I would at all interest me for Francis is if they want to book the Derek Lewis rematch and both those guys could kind of get some redemption for that god awful fight. I would be interested in watching that, but I feel bad for Francis because you're right. They're not booking DC Stipe anytime soon. And, until that happens, Francis is kind of out of option.
Yeah, it's just like he's just on the verge of becoming a huge superstar. And, unfortunately with the COVID thing and everything that's going on with Stipe and DC and then the uncertainty of Jon Jones, he's kind of pretty much left in limbo. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But I really do. I think we'll have an answer on this in the next month or so. I think they're going to have to book one of those guys. whether it's, a short turnaround for Francis to take on, Black Beast, or Jon defending his light heavyweight belt. I think you've got to fill the big summer cards with those guys and big names. So keep an eye out on that. We'll keep everyone posted. But that's, for me right now, that's the most important fight to make in MMA. That does so much for the sport. So, all right, let's move on. We've got fights this weekend. Obviously, we mentioned it at the top. Not a great card. I think they kind of blew their load in the first 3 cards back from the pandemic, but we've still got former champion, one of the best welterweights of all time, Tyron Woodley, taking on rising star Gilbert Burns. Give me kind of the rundown of where they're fighting, and then we'll dive into what we think about this fight.
Yeah, so I will say, as much as we're kind of dogging this card, this main event is really as good as it gets. This is a stellar fight. I absolutely encourage everyone to tune in for this main event. I think it's going to be a really good one. But we are good to go at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas for this fight night, which is great. They did the last few in Jacksonville. The Apex is the new state-of-the-art facility that the UFC built to film the Contender Series. So it's fully outfitted as a TV studio. It's built in kind of this contained setting where they don't have the kind of cavernous arena that they have to deal with, but they can kind of make these made-for-TV cards with no crowd very easily. And it's better because it's in Las Vegas. You have the whole UFC infrastructure there for meals, for training, for guys getting equipment, for housing. And I think it's going to be much better. Something that's going to be different this week is they're going to use the 25-foot cage instead of the 30-foot cage. So, if you're betting, expect more knockouts, more finishes. It's going to be kind of higher pace fights, closer fights. The other thing is they kind of have updated guidelines for the COVID-19 testing and protocols. So I think a lot of the stuff that people complained about on Twitter and other social media apps for the fights last week about social distancing and people being kept, apart and, the way people were tested, I think a lot of that will be improved by this being in Vegas. So I think this is really best for everyone.
Has the Vegas Strip opened back up yet at all?
They're talking about opening up casinos this week, I believe.
Like a soft opening, like limited capacity type things, or what?
Yeah, limited capacity. The thing that's hard about a casino is it's indoors and they have elaborate HVAC systems, right? So you're circulating a lot of that air throughout the casino to a lot of people. So if you're in a casino for a long period of time and you're infected and you're shedding the virus, you transmit it throughout the HVAC system. So that makes it kind of difficult to do a casino.
So do you know where the fighters are staying, and is the Apex going to be the home for the next couple cards? Is that kind of the game plan?
I think that's the game plan. Dana says Fight Island is going to be ready in July. The ironic part of that is now professional athletes, even from travel banned countries, can get special permission to travel to the U.S. So as long as you figure it out ahead of time, you really don't need Fight Island. But hey, it's Dana White, so here we go. But yeah, I think the Apex will be there. The fighters will probably staying in a hotel. I assume Dana has relationships with the hotel owners in Las Vegas, and I can't imagine that they're packed right now. And then, there's also a lot of Vegas-based fighters and, people from kind of driving distance of Las Vegas that can come in and, not have to stay there for that long. So that'll be good.
Right. All right. So let's dive into the main event. Like we said, we've got former welterweight champion Tyron Woodley coming back. He hasn't fought since losing his belt to Usman over a year ago now, right? I think it was last March. We've got Gilbert Burns, who moved up from 155 and has really been surging at 170. So for me, this is a crossroads fight for Tyron Woodley. his back's kind of against the wall right now. He's still ranked at number one, the number one contender, which I don't get. Like, if you lose to the champion, then don't fight for a year, and you've got a lot of activity. You have to shuffle him in. I know are you going to go off on that?
Let me justify Tyron being the number one contender right now, because I actually think he's incredibly deserving. Okay, so here's the thing. So the three guys you're arguing for are Colby, Masvidal, and
Leon Edwards.
Leon Edwards, right?
Yes. Yes.
Those are your three guys. So
yes.
Colby got finished by Kamaru Usman.
In a great fight, though. In a great fight.
But he didn't. Tyron did not get finished. Tyron did not get beat up in that fight. He lost badly to Usman, but he did not get beat up.
I'm not going to say Colby got beat up. Colby broke his jaw in, the fifth round, but it was a very, very competitive fight. We're not going to.
He got finished.
Yes, but he put on a much better performance than Tyron Woodley. My thing is, if you lose to the champion, you should. I don't know. I think you should go down to number 3 and then have to take one more fight to work your way back up to the title. Okay. It's just confusing if you leave an inactive ex-champion at number 1. It makes no sense. If he's the number 1 contender, he should be fighting Usman again. We shouldn't.
He beat Darren Till. That's Masvidal's probably Masvidal's best win. He beat Darren Till. And we had the Leon Woodley matchup booked, which is exactly what you're talking about, like moving down to number 3. It's not like they booked him an immediate rematch. They booked him against the top contender. They had it booked. It was ready to go. That was the perfect fight. And, global pandemic happens. That's not Tyron Woodley's fault. Tyron Woodley's a better fighter than Colby Covington, and I think he beats Jorge Masvidal too.
Whew, I don't know about that. I think right now, Tyron Woodley's, 38 years old? I think Colby Covington melts Tyron Woodley. Melts him. And I think Masvidal could go in there and knock him out. I really do. He's 38 years old.
That's a close fight.
Yeah, that one's a toss-up. I think Colby goes in there and dominates Tyron Woodley. And that's going to be one of the fights that got away. The UFC should have made that fight 2 years ago. All right, but outside of that, he's your number 1 contender. Gilbert Burns is, to me, kind of a guy that can do everything. Obviously, he's world class at jiu-jitsu, and I'll let you talk about that a little more, but he's just well-rounded everywhere, and he's getting better. He just seems to be going, on an upward trajectory, and Tyron seems to be at a crossroads. Like, this is a big, big fight for Tyron Woodley. So, yeah. What do you think 38-year-old Tyron Woodley has in the tank, and do you think he can make another run at the title?
So, couple things. Tyron Woodley is still a all-American, world-class wrestler with dynamite in his hands. He's never been super reliant on speed. He's never been super reliant on volume. He's reliant on wrestling defense, and that bomb of a right hand. I don't think Gilbert Burns has ever felt someone who hits like Tyron Woodley. You're talking about a former lightweight here who's really made his bones in the UFC. Not that Gilbert Burns isn't impressive, because he is, but he's been taking short notice fights against kind of, your tough guys just outside the top 15. I mean, the Damian Maia win is huge. Don't get me wrong. Very impressive. He's a world champion in jiu-jitsu. He's unbelievable on the ground. Tyron Woodley's also a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Tyron Woodley Darce choked Darren Till in a welterweight title fight. He's very, very good still. And he's 38, but he's not that old in fight years. Like, he doesn't have that many miles on him. He hasn't taken that much damage.
Right. Well, he's a guy that, got the title late. I don't think he got the title till he was, 33 or 34? So, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where he's at, because the Tyron Woodley that fought Usman a year ago, that's not the championship caliber Tyron Woodley. And it could have been chalked up to, hey, it was an off night, or it could have been, hey, I'm 38 years old, I'm starting to fade a little bit, and you've got these animals coming up, through the rankings gunning for you. So I don't know. I'm really, really interested in this fight. This is a really big fight for the division. All right. So with the win, where do these guys go from here at welterweight?
I mean, if you win this fight, I think you're right in that title conversation, especially with, all this talk of, and we'll get into that later, but Usman and Masvidal, not being able to come to terms on a deal. If you win this fight this weekend, I think you have every claim in the world to get a welterweight title shot.
No, I agree. Do you think there's any chance Woodley moves up to middleweight?
It's interesting. I think he would for the right fight. I think Woodley would move up for a middleweight title shot. I think he would move up for like an Anderson Silva. I think would probably interest Tyron Woodley at middleweight. But I think even like a Luke Rockhold might interest him at middleweight if that were to come to fruition in some bizarro world. But I don't see him moving up to like take on Yoel Romero.
Oh my God, that's a fun fight.
But I tend to think Tyron is kind of fighting out his UFC deal and is going to head to Bellator after this because I think he wants to get with Scott Coker again, and I don't think he really likes working with Dana White all that much. The only thing that's going to stop that is Tyron getting a title.
Yeah, his situation kind of reminds me of Cyborg's situation. Like, obviously, he was in Strikeforce before with Scott Coker. They have a great relationship. You come to the UFC, become champion, and then you don't really reach the stardom that you anticipate. And Tyron's, anytime you hear him talk, he always has a chip on his shoulder. For the UFC brass, it's like, hey, he never got the right break or got treated the right way. So I could definitely see that. And with, Rory McDonald leaving Bellator's welterweight division, you insert Tyron Woodley in there. That's a lot of fun fights. So, I can see that. What about Gilbert Burns? If he gets a win, where does he go?
I think he's fighting Kamaru Usman next. I mean, he's been kind of the consummate company man. I mean, he fights anyone, any weight, anytime, anywhere, short notice, normal camp. It doesn't matter. He's always in there. He's an exciting fighter. His striking has improved immensely. I mean, both of these guys, you see the videos of Woodley at AKA Thailand. He looks unbelievable. And, obviously Gilbert Burns has gotten so much better as a striker over his time in the UFC. And, I think this is a really fun fight. I'm really excited for it. I'm gonna pick Woodley here. I think Woodley's gonna get this done. I'm thinking he's probably gonna finish him maybe in the second round. What do you have, Parker?
I kind of agree. I think it's maybe too much too soon for Gilbert Burns. I think Woodley's going to have a chip on his shoulder. I'm not certain where he's at right now, but I still think a 38-year-old Woodley can come in and knock out Gilbert Burns. Like you said, I'm going to watch out for the power. It's Woodley's power. He's not getting taken down by Gilbert Burns. I think he stuffed like 27 takedowns from Damian Maia in their fight. And I would say Damian Maia is probably a similar, class of ground fighter as Gilbert Burns. Maybe the wrestling's not as great, but there's the threat of, jiu-jitsu is very similar. So I'm going to go with Woodley. I think I'm going to go third round knockout Woodley. I think he's probably going to have a little bit of rust. He's been out for a while. This Gilbert Burns, he's explosive. Woodley may have to weather an early storm, but I think he's going to use his experience, his power, takedown defense, and I think you get a knockout, Tyron Woodley knockout. And then I think you book the Colby fight. I think if he gets a knockout against Gilbert Burns, he gets on the mic, calls out Colby Covington. I don't think he's going to get an immediate title shot, but him versus Colby is a gigantic fight at welterweight. That's probably the biggest fight you can make outside of, a title fight at welterweight right now. So that's what I would like to see. But yeah, that's going to be a fun fight. And then, like we said, our boy Brock Weaver's fighting on that card. He's very, very fun to watch. He's on the main. I believe he's on the main card. Show. Yeah, he's on the main card, right?
Yeah, Brock. Oh yeah, he's fighting Roosevelt Roberts, who that guy can bang too. That's going to be a hell of a fight for Brock.
Yeah, we'll have to get him on after to kind of get his whole feel of the whole thing. But yeah, I'll be pulling for Brock in that. Outside of that, not a lot of big names. I'm anticipating they're going to reload for this June 6th card. I think that should be a pretty decent card. They haven't released that whole thing yet, have they?
They've released a lot of it. It's a really deep card. There's no like wow fight. There's no big headliner. Obviously, they're headlining it with Amanda Nunes against Felicia Spencer, but the fight card is really deep. There's a lot of good fights on it.
The only fights they have on the main card are Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer, and then they've got Ian Heinisch versus Gerald Marchant, Charles Boyd versus someone I've never heard of, Alex Perez, Jussier Formega, Alonzo Menningfield, and Devin Clark. So it looks like they've got, 5 fights booked so far? But I would imagine next week that's all going to have to come out, right?
Yeah, I mean, they have more fights than that book.
Do they?
Must not just have put them up yet.
Right, UFC, let's get it together on your damn website. Come on.
That Mearshart Ian Heinisch fight is a really good fight, though.
Yeah, no, that really is. All right, we're making good time here, Billy. We're being very professional. Let's get into current events. All right, Conor McGregor in the news again this week, went on a gigantic rant, basically saying that he classifies him. He says by the end of his career, he will be the undisputed GOAT of MMA. I want to get your initial thoughts on that, and then I want to run through, and I want each of us to give our top 3 to 5 GOATs of MMA as it stands today.
For the listeners, just so you guys know, Parker in the notes wrote top 3 GOATs and then proceeded to write about 12 names. So that's why we've now expanded from top 3 to 3 to 5.
Sometimes I get a little carried away. Just a little carried away.
As far as Conor goes, obviously he's hyping himself up, and it's like classic Conor, and we're talking about it, and it's stirring controversy, and I like all that. Like I'm all for it, but I think you lose sight of his argument because it's almost so ridiculous. But I think he's got more of a point than people realize, just because I think finishes do matter. The way that you won fights should matter when you're evaluating a GOAT. I'm not saying it's everything, but I'm also saying that in MMA, like an undefeated record is also not everything. Never losing is also not everything. So I would rather a guy who came out and finished fights rather than a guy who all of his decisions or all of his fights are lay and pray decisions or really safe fights. I'm not necessarily someone who thinks it's all about just winning at any cost. I think if you can produce exciting finishes, that launches you above as well. And I think that's part of what Conor is arguing.
Yeah, and I think with Conor, you've got to look at him differently than you look at GSP, Anderson Silva, Jon Jones. For him, it's high risk, high reward. Everything he's done with his career. I mean, for me, if Conor wanted to take the GSP route, he could have stayed at 145, and I think he's your dominant champion at 145. But he didn't. He's going to be gunning. I guarantee you he's going to find a way to talk himself into a third title fight at 170 by the end of the year somehow. And for Conor, it's just doing what's the next biggest thing you can do. He doesn't take the traditional model of, hey, I'm going to fight at one weight class. I need 10 title defenses. No, his is what's going to be the biggest thing, the highest risk, the biggest thing he can do to continue his name and the aura of Conor McGregor. And that's the way I think he looks at it. And that's why, to me, I get the point of, hey, Conor, at the moment, he could classify himself as a GOAT because he's the biggest name in the sport. The things he's done for the UFC and MMA as a whole, worldwide, no one's done that. No one's even came close. So, yeah, I don't know. For me, it's going to take a couple more. It's going to take him getting another title, whether he picks it up at 170 or he finds a way to get his 155 belt back. And then, yeah, I mean, I could see it when it's all said and done, Conor being the best, most well-known fighter of all time. I don't know about GOAT because you've got, GSP, Jon Jones, Anderson Silva that have the title defenses and the wins. And for me, GSP has the best case because every loss that he's had, he's defended. He defended the Matt Hughes loss, he got it back. He defended the Matt Serra loss, he got it back. And he's just kind of the consummate pro, real no blemishes in his outside life, where you've got Conor, you've got Jon Jones, who are just reckless, kind of off the wall, always have drama in their personal life. Anderson Silva popped for steroids. So that's kind of my thoughts on that at the moment.
I think it's just an impossible conversation because what you're talking about, right, is the male GOAT. Because Amanda Nunes is the most accomplished MMA fighter any gender the sport has ever seen. There's no other fighter who's beaten every champion in every weight class that they've fought in.
No, that's true. Yeah, female GOAT, it's hands down Amanda Nunes. Male GOAT, it's harder because it's not apples to apples. You had Conor McGregor at the prime of his career, stepped away from the sport to fight Floyd Mayweather. You can't compare that to the trajectory that, the career path that GSP was on. It's just different. Conor just looks at it different.
And are you considering, so when you talk about this, are you talking about the person who had the highest peak, who was the best, like at a moment in time, they were the best to ever do it? Or are you talking about the person who put together the best resume? Because Cowboy Cerrone has a much better resume, in my opinion, than Conor McGregor does when you look at the whole career and add up all the achievements. But we've seen them fight. There's no argument that Cowboy is somehow greater than Conor as a fighter, in my opinion.
Yeah, but Cowboy is similar to Conor. He's not basing his legacy on wins and losses. He's taking risks, taking fun fights. That's why those two guys are two of the most fan favorite fighters ever. So it's interesting. But for me, or for you go ahead. Give me your top 5 GOATs at the moment as it stands.
So for me, number 1 is Jon Jones. And steroids aside, I think if you're going to talk about this sport and you're going to care, like in the history of this sport, and you're really going to care about who was using steroids and who wasn't, you're going to have to exclude, 80% of the greatest fighters ever, probably more. So I don't really care about the picograms thing. I don't think it really affects, Jon in the way that a lot of people do. But here's what Jon Jones has for me. He has wins over legitimate champions in 3 eras. He has a virtually unblemished record, if not for the Matt Hamill downward elbow.
It's unblemished. Jon Jones has never lost.
And he has just a litany. He has finishes in every way you could possibly get finishes. He has joint locks. He has chokes. He has knockouts with elbows, with knees, with punches, with kicks. He is just the most complete martial artist. And, at his size, there's no argument to me that, he didn't fight great competition. He didn't fight against, guys who were, a normal size like Mighty Mouse. Because I do buy that argument with Mighty Mouse that, how are you going to say he's the greatest fighter ever when, he's below an average American size? So Jon Jones for me is 1. 2 is Fedor. I think he was the first guy we saw who was really good at multiple disciplines, like world class at, Sambo, judo, and boxing. He was the king of the best I've ever seen. He fought everyone on, every steroid in the book in the hardest rule set in MMA history. And, other than kind of this late chapter of his career, which a lot of it is kind of, questionable how much the old Fedor was still there. He was unbeaten for a decade. It was unbelievable. And then my third guy is who you mentioned, GSP. Obviously the record's there, sterling reputation. The thing that puts him behind Jon and Fedor for me is the lack of finishes. GSP's got a lot of decisions, and at some point that has to matter. Doesn't make him a less complete martial artist. I mean, being the third best MMA fighter of all time is nothing to sniff at, but big fan of GSP. The other two I kind of had as my honorable mentions, Jose Aldo. I mean, people forget because of the McGregor knockout, but Jose Aldo dominated that division from the outset. He was good at everything. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling, defense, nasty Muay Thai, nasty leg kicks. And then my last guy I had was Anderson Silva. I think just the way he progressed the sport, the array of finishes. Obviously the thing that dings him versus the other guys is Anderson has a couple losses, both early and late in his career, that I think bring him down a little bit. But, at his peak, I mean, the guy was a wizard in the cage, just absolute master of distance, of movement, and, use that to his advantage. Parker,
yeah.
who did you have?
For me, Jon Jones is number one, hands down. He could retire, walk away from the sport right now. He's the best mixed martial artist ever. Jon Jones. Number two, I had GSP. I just think, although his fighting style compared to Jon Jones, compared to Conor McGregor is completely different, he was just a dominant all-around fighter that avenged both of his losses. Got 2 titles, class act. So he's number 2 for me. Number 3, I had Anderson Silva. I think Anderson Silva, Fedor are kind of right there. Both of those guys in their prime just had an aura about them. They were untouchable. Fedor obviously never made it to the UFC, which was a shame. If we could have had Fedor in his prime in the UFC, I think we would have had a lot of fun, would have had a lot of good fights, and I think he would be more well-renowned as one of the greatest fighters of all time. So those two are kind of, tied at 3 for me. After that, I've got to say, you got to go DC. I think the resume that DC has put together at light heavyweight and heavyweight, I don't see how you could deny he's a top fighter of all time. He's beat everyone on the planet across 2 weight classes, across multiple organizations that aren't named Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. So DC, I think, gets snubbed on these lists a lot, and I don't get it. I think he's going to be, when it's all said and done, he's going to be one of the greatest fighters of all time. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that when we look back 10 years from now, you're going to realize how great DC was. And, Jon just had his number as the bottom line. And, in the fight he lost to Stipe, he was beating Stipe's ass most of the fight. And then Stipe just hung in there, kept chipping.
41 years old?
Yeah. So, I mean, DC, in my eyes, he's one of the best to ever do it. And then I think at number 5, you've got arguments for Khabib. Obviously, if he finishes his career undefeated, he's going to go down as one of the best fighters ever. And then I think after that, you're kind of in Conor, Jose Aldo territory. Conor, he could walk away from the sport right now, and I would regard him, right in the top 5 just because of what he's done for the sport and what he's meant for the sport and how many eyes he's brought to the sport. I think that's very, very important. We're not where we're at today in the UFC if it's not for Conor McGregor. So he's a pioneer. And when we go back and look at his resume, when he's all said and done, it's going to be pretty spectacular. I mean, he's got knockout wins against Max Holloway, Jose Aldo, Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, his resume is going to be incredible, especially if he can get a win back against, get a win against Justin Gaethje, or, goes and knocks out, George Masvidal, another big name like that. Like, it's only big fights from here on out for Conor. So I think 3 or 4 more fights, he adds just gigantic names to his resume. He's going to be a top 5 fighter for sure. So that was my list, but it was interesting. Literally seemed like Conor just went on a rant, and then the whole MMA planet went into debates about their greatest fighters of all time. So that was interesting. I thought I'd ask you about that. What do we got next?
You want to run through these recently booked fights, and then...
Yeah, let's do that. You started off. I lost my page here.
How about we do recently booked fights, Mike Tyson, and then we get out of here.
Oh, Jesus, Mike Tyson. I'm so scared of him making a return.
All right. So first one that got booked, Aljamain Sterling against Corey Sandhagen.
So what's going on? Are they booking Peter Yan and Jose Aldo?
They haven't booked any Peter Yan for anything. I think they're booking this and thinking that the winner of that fight is going to fight Yan for the 135 title.
Yeah, no, I love this matchup. This is stylistically, this is a really, really fun fight. I agree. I would be totally down with that. I think Peter Yan's done enough to earn that title fight. I think you have these two guys fight it out to get the next crack at the title. I wouldn't mind seeing Dom Cruz, Jose Aldo. I think that's a fun fight. I think Dom Cruz has still got a little bit to offer. Jose Aldo, that's a great matchup. So that was good to have booked at bantamweight there. Next we get Chase Hooper, Ben Askren's son, back in action against what's his name? Bruce Leroy. Hell yeah. That's a really, really fun fight. Big step up in competition for Chase Hooper. He's a guy, he came off the Contender Series. He's got a lot of personality, great fighter, super technical. His jiu-jitsu is awesome. So that was a good fight. What do you think about that?
And it's a do or die fight for Caceres. I mean, if you remember, he got choked out really, really quickly against Kron Gracie. I don't think Hooper's jiu-jitsu is at the level of Kron Gracie, but I mean, Caceres is kind of at the end of his rope here at the UFC if he loses this one, even though he does have that. Yeah, he has that fun karate style. But, you know, if Hooper's able to get him to the ground and submit him, I think that could be curtains for the UFC career here for Bruce Leroy.
Yeah, no, I agree. At flyweight, we got the rematch booked. I think that's the only fight to make. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, maybe, but Joey Benavidez gets his rematch against Davison Figueiredo. I think you had to book that. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with that. I thought that was a great fight. Obviously, Figueiredo didn't make weight the first time, so the title remained vacant. And for Joey Benavidez, this is his last crack to get UFC gold. And, you know, I think that's a great matchup.
Yeah, let's run it back. I think it's perfect. I'm glad they did it.
All right, Sugar Sean back in action in what, 9 days? 9 days until we get Sugar Sean. Let's freaking go. Taking on Eddie Wineland, former WEC champ. This is a really, really fun fight. Yeah, I think it's a perfect fight to kind of ease Sugar Sean into that top 10. Because once he gets in that top 10, everyone's going to be coming for his head. That dude's, you know, especially if he goes in here.
135 is such a gauntlet. It's such a gauntlet. It's brutal. So,
it's crazy.
I love this fight. I think Wineland is a vet and, you know, a crafty guy who, you know, will be able to give Sean some problems. I think ultimately Sugar Sean's going to finish him, but you know, I really like this fight, and I think it's going to be a great experience for him.
No, I agree. All right, real quick, I got to mention Joe Rogan and his $100 million deal to sign exclusively with Spotify. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I think, you know, ultimately all this does is free up Parker's MMA show for the you know, Apple Podcast rankings.
Yeah, we're taking over YouTube.
Joe, our competitions.
We're coming for Joe's spot on YouTube. Crazy.
But Spotify can call our agents at any time. You know, if you have a similar deal for Parker and I, we are open to it. And
we're open for business. But that's crazy. I think that's huge for podcasts, MMA in general. For Joe to continue to grow the audience. You know, I think he had on Justin Gaethje, and it had ridiculous views. So I think his show is very, very important. The way he's doing it, you know, giving these fighters a platform to just come out and talk about fighting, talk about their story, talk about the life. I think that's really, really important for our sport, and that's awesome. He signed that deal. That's pretty fucking awesome. Congratulations, Joe. You're the man. All right, BKFC debating they have an offer on the table, a $20 million offer to bring Mike Tyson out of retirement at age 53. What are your thoughts on this?
I have no desire to watch Mike Tyson fight bare knuckle. And where is bare knuckle boxing getting 8-figure purse money. Like,
that's what I'm asking. What is going on?
I have no idea, Parker. I've been trying to figure out like the bare knuckle boxing thing, since kind of the Paulie Malignaggi Artem Lobov fight, where I was like, okay, the novelty's over. Like, I'm not interested in this, and I'm the biggest combat sports fan I know. And then they come out with this, and they're trying to get him to fight Vanderlei Silva, and Tito Ortiz is interested. Can we not with the MMA fighters trying to fight Mike Tyson?
I don't want to see on the verge of retiring legends of MMA fighting Mike Tyson in boxing. I just don't want to see that. I really don't want to see Mike Tyson fighting bare knuckles, period. I think he could kill someone. Have you seen how amazing he looks? The dude is shredded, and still, like, when he's doing the shadow boxing, it is so scary. He looks like he hasn't lost a step. It's crazy.
3-minute rounds. Either Shannon Briggs or Evander Holyfield. No more. We don't need any more. Like, just an exhibition bout, normal boxing gloves, maybe bigger boxing gloves, and just get it over with. We all have the morbid curiosity to see Mike Tyson fight again, but not bare knuckle, not against an MMA guy.
All right, Dave Feldman, I got a game plan for you. I want a Pride-style one-night tournament, 4 men, Mike Tyson versus the Axe Murderer, Holyfield versus Shannon the Cannon. Let's go. Let's do it. That could generate some money. I'm down with that. Let's do it.
Mike Tyson might kill Vanderlei Silva.
Mike Tyson might kill all of them. Have you seen how scary he looks? He's so... I'm so scared of Mike Tyson. All right, we got to get someone from bare knuckle boxing on the podcast to give us a scoop on what the hell is going on here. All right, so that covers it. Billy, anything else you want to add? I think we made our time. We hit an hour and 2 minutes. We are right on spot. So yeah, big main event this weekend. I would expect that June 6th card is going to have a lot of fun fights on it. So everyone, check out the fights this weekend. Be on the lookout for the fights on June 6th. I think that's going to be a big card. Same as always, like, subscribe, share, get the word out. Me and Billy will keep bringing the information week by week. So we'll be back next week to recap the card and then look forward to the June 6th card. Billy, any closing words?
You excited for hockey to come back, Parker?
I need something else. Yeah, I think I need a little bit of hockey. I don't know how I'm going to do hockey, though, with not going. The big thing, hockey, I got to be there live. I'm not hugely in on watching hockey on TV. I got to be there live, and I don't know what's going to happen. When does hockey return?
They haven't announced the date yet, but they're going to do a 24-team playoff, so 12 teams per conference.
And Dallas is supposed to be one of the hub cities, right?
Dallas is bidding to be a hub city, but there'd be no fans anyway, so it really doesn't matter. I've got
a little inside scoop real quick. We'll talk a little hockey, but anyway, Dallas apparently has 8 star centers. So I think the idea is they're gonna just fly teams in, and they'll have kind of tournament style playoffs, and they'll host them all at those centers. So that'll be kind of interesting. But so they're done with the regular season. They're just jumping into playoffs.
Right into the playoffs.
All right, Parker's MMA show. Experts in fighting, semi-experts in hockey. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next week. Billy, you're the man. We'll see you later. Till next time. Adios.
Adios, Parker.
Thanks for listening to Parker's MMA show. Take a moment to rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit ParkerKeane'sMMAShow.podbean.com for additional information on Parker and to stay up to date on the latest drama in the fight world. For more information and important links about today's episode, check out the show notes.